You call the roll to make sure a quorum is present.
Mr. Moldaver?
Here.
Mr. Hawkins? Here. Ms. Lomas? Here. Ms. Weber? Here. And Ms. Owens? Here. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen. I think many of you remember what an exciting meeting January 21st, 2015 was. And the draft minutes barely capture the excitement, but I want to see whether there's a motion to adopt the draft minutes of the January meeting, or are there any amendments or additions or corrections to the draft as submitted by staff?
I do have a few potential corrections. So on the street sweeping program and history review, it has committee members Weber and French as the first and second on that for the motion. And I don't remember if Ms. Weber was a part of the motion, but Ms. French couldn't have because she's on. Oh yeah, that's right. So that needs to be corrected, and I'm not sure who the first and second would be. And then on the specific actions that we took or recommendations, I believe we had an item in there about neighborhood enforcement frequency potentially as an issue to look at, and then just as a correction on, let's see. It says provide a more specific breakdown of costs associated with the transfer requested for Measure B funds. I don't know if that was supposed to be in place of a regular report on street sweeping to the budget committee, but I remember us putting that in there as well. And I think that's all I've got.
Are there any other amendments, additions, or corrections, or will someone make a motion to accept the draft minutes as corrected?
I'll make that motion.
Is there a second? What is your mic?
I'll second.
All right, it's been moved and seconded to accept the corrected version of the minutes of the January 2015 meeting. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
All right, so one abstention and none, two abstentions. And boy, but both of your lives have been shrunken by missing that meeting. People just can't realize how much happened there. Okay, the corrected minutes are adopted. Mr. Benson, are there any adjustments or changes to the published agenda?
No.
I see we've got three fantastic members of the public here. Two of them are distinguished civil servants. Is there any public comment where any member of the public can come up for 2 minutes to talk about any relevant item that's not already on the agenda? Hearing none, the public comment is closed. That brings us to item number 6, if you're following along at home, which is committee member and staff communications. Mr. Benson, anything to report?
No, Mr. Chair.
Do any of the committee members have any communications since the last meeting on relevant subjects that they'd like to share? All right, hearing none, that brings us to item number 7, our first business item, 7A, Mission Lagoon and Laguna Creek Restoration Project. There's an attachment involved, and Mr. George Thompson from the Creek and Watershed Program will be presenting. George?
Thank you. This evening I'll be giving an update on the Mission Lagoon and Laguna Creek project. It's a project that the city started actively pursuing about 2 years ago, so I'll be giving a brief update on what has happened and where we're going with it. To refresh everybody's memory, the project study areas basically entail 3 distinct, more or less sub-projects. Starting over on the western portion there, Mission Creek at the Railroad Depot Channel, and then on the waterfront, Mission Lagoon. And then on the eastern portion there, a small portion of Laguna Channel, which is known as El Estero Drain. So for background, city staff and members of the public, including business owners, special interest groups, environmental groups, put together through a pretty long process of public outreach these project goals, which really encapsulated the Creeks Division's main purpose, which is to improve water quality, native plant habitat, wildlife habitat. But also because of the nature and location of these projects, encompassed a wider array of project goals, including flood control, which I'll talk about specifically as it relates to the Laguna Channel pump station, a wide variety of surrounding infrastructure, including the multi-purpose pathway, the parking lots, at the railroad depot channel, obviously the railroad tracks and the railroad depot itself, the many existing uses such as recreational uses along the waterfront, the harbor dredging operations, and then obviously the aesthetics. This is really a doorway to Santa Barbara. Public safety issues associated with both flooding, but also any sort of fall hazards associated with the creek restoration areas, and then ensure consistency with the numerous city projects, including the Lower Mission Creek Flood Control Project, and various other management plans that regulate and define a lot of the operations in the city waterfront area. So given those project goals, the city hired a multidisciplinary consulting firm called ESA. They're based out of San Francisco, and really their specialty is in, at least the staff that were hired for this project, their specialty is in coastal engineering, coastal processes, with a tilt towards habitat restoration and lagoon restoration. So ESA completed the existing condition study, which outlined all of those uses in a technical way, but also simply getting out to the arts folks that use that area during the weekends for their art shows, tourists, residents that use the bike path. They also completed more technical studies such as flood modeling, so computer flood modeling, both on the railroad reach, but some dynamic modeling in the lagoon area, and then a lot of analysis on the Laguna Channel and pump station area, both for the existing condition with the Lower Mission Creek Flood Control Project, but also the proposed changes that were later defined in the project. They defined historic resources, wetlands, those public uses I talked about, analyzed the existing structures, so the pump station, the channel walls at the railroad depot, and then went into a lot of detail on the coastal processes, such as projected sea level rise, and analyzed how those changes would affect any proposed restoration project in the area. So let's start at Mission Lagoon. Everybody in Santa Barbara has been here at some point. And let me point out that our focus for this project was really on the eastern portion of the lagoon area. And you'll see in the upper right of that photo is where Laguna Channel comes down. There's a pump station there, and then out on the beach is the tide gate structure and associated infrastructure. And by way of introduction, we also have Pat Kelly here, who is the Assistant Public Works Director and the City Engineer, and he will be available for comments or questions related to the infrastructure that Public Works manages. But let me back up and say the western portion of the lagoon has basically already been designed and permitted under the Lower Mission Creek Flood Control Project and the Cabrillo Bridge Replacement Project, which is happening currently. And so there's restoration plan for the lagoon habitat there, including the dunes, that portion just downstream of Cabrillo Boulevard, but also the upstream portion in what is called the estuary portion of Mission Creek. And so this project didn't look at those areas because it's already been designed. The Coastal Commission has permitted a lot of that work. And so our focus was how do we blend the two restoration areas into a coherent design. And through that process, we focus a lot of our efforts on the Laguna Channel pump station, how it could potentially be improved. And really what it came down to is there still needs to be analysis on how the proposed changes would affect the function of that facility in providing flood protection for a large portion of Santa Barbara east of State Street, basically where we are today in this area. And so at this point, Public Works is taking the lead on defining what studies need to happen to answer those questions, and the Creeks Division is stepping back from the active design of this area and focusing more on the other two components of the project area. So jumping upstream at Mission Creek, this is looking down on the railroad depot. So the actual depot building is in the center lower right there. And if you look right dead center in that photo, you'll see the actual channel itself. And to the right of the channel are the railroad tracks. And so let's jump down to a ground level view. This is looking upstream Mission Creek. We've got these historic sandstone walls, which create a lot of constraints for doing any sort of modifications on this stretch of Mission Creek. Basically, those walls are part of the National Register of Historic Places, and so we can't modify them to an extent that would take away from the historic nature of that designation. And so really our focus was more, how do we restore certain functions to the creek, whether it's increased fish passage, better water quality, and more wildlife habitat within the confines of basically the channel bed. And the proposal at a concept level is, this is to orient you all looking downstream now, and so on the right side of the channel is the railroad depot and the railroad tracks. And really the consultant focused in on the right side of the channel because there's certain design parameters that are outlined by the railroad, Southern Pacific, that limit the amount of excavation that you can do within a certain distance of their railroad tracks. And so to avoid a lot of that complex permitting, liability issues, we really focused on the right side of the channel. And what you see here is there's an existing channel bottom, which is concrete. It's coming out in some places just because of age. And so we're splitting the channel in half, deepening it by about 4 feet, and putting in underpinning walls, which basically hold the existing historic sandstone wall in place. And then you'll see that longer gray bar there is a pile structure. And then on the left side of that new channel, you'll see basically a small retaining wall. And so it's a lot of engineering, a lot of concrete to get to this, but what are the benefits? And part of the benefits are you have a deeper channel where the low flow can flow, and so for steelhead passage, it's more likely that they'll be able to go upstream at a conceptual level. You have a cobble bed, which represents more of a natural creek bed, where you could have some sort of wetland vegetation grow, obviously not to the point where it would restrict flood flows and raise flood elevations, but basically the consultant did all of the flood modeling and showed technically it is feasible to do this sort of project without increasing flooding. And so that's where we are with this design. Our staff recommendation is let's put this concept level out there, but let's not take it forward because we've got 2 other projects that are higher priority. This is available for either other agencies to look at as a potential design, or in the future, if there are modifications, this is one that is technically feasible at a concept level. So jumping over to El Estero Drain, so for reference, there's Mission Lagoon down at the bottom left. Laguna Channel is that green vegetation that goes up towards the freeway, and El Estero Drain is just south of the wastewater treatment plant. So you can see those circular structures in the center of the photo. There's a big white tank there. And so if you just go a little bit towards the beach, you'll see a small channel there. And we can zoom in on that at the ground level. There's that big white tank there. And this is the existing El Estero drain. It does have a bit of history that I outlined in the staff report. And basically, the summary of that is the city has an obligation to restore a portion of the channel. And the proposal that the Creeks Division is putting forward as a restoration plan would supplement that required mitigation that Public Works is required to do. And so what is the proposal then? You can see the existing condition right now at El Estero Drain is there is a channel bed there, not a lot of vegetation, mostly dominated by non-native exotic weeds such as castor bean. And then looking down the channel towards Laguna Creek, the bed itself is underlain by basically a plastic liner that was installed in 2002, and so Public Works, as part of their proposal, is going to remove that liner and do some restoration. And so the Creeks Division then is proposing to come in and in the areas where Public Works is not restoring, take care of the rest of that portion of El Estero Drain and restore open water pond habitat that would be beneficial for southwestern pond turtles, emergent wetlands, so those are species such as tules, rushes, sedges, to provide some cover and shading on the channel, and then upland habitat in a mix of native grassland species and some shrub coverage. So we don't want a really dense cover there because the southwestern pond turtles, although an aquatic species, they use the upland areas for nesting and other parts of their life cycle. So that's the habitat side of things. At a concept level, we also have a big water quality component, and there are obviously a lot of permitting issues and details to be worked out with this, but the proposal from the consultants is during low flows, so primarily during the summer, they looked at a possibility of moving some of the water in the main stem of Laguna Channel, pumping that up to the top of El Estero Drain, and basically letting it flow through what is more or less a constructed wetland that has both the habitat value but also a water quality improvement value. So that's looking at it from top down. If we do a cross-section, another big part of this concept is to do more excavation from the existing topography. So you can see in that hashed line, that's the existing topography, and so the proposal would be to remove all of that material and create more wetland habitat. So going forward, we're coordinating with Public Works staff on how do we combine these two restoration projects, limit redundancies and effort, and end up with a project that is a lot better than the existing condition. So for the Creeks Division, we're going to be refining the scope of work and the technical studies that are going to be required to produce a preliminary design and eventually a workable restoration project. We anticipate in the next month or so we'll wrap that up in consultation with the wastewater folks, and then we'll go out, hire a consulting firm that has expertise in wetland restoration, water quality, special status species such as the southwestern pond turtle, and then we'll bring it back to the Creeks Committee with a preliminary design at that point. So that's where we are. I'd be happy to answer any questions, or Pat is available again for specific questions related to the waterfront portion of the project.
Thank you, George. Excellent presentation. This is an item for discussion and comment, so I hope you all have questions. I'd like to start at the end with the El Estero portion where they're proposing to dredge to make the proposed wetland areas larger and more self-sustaining. What do you and our Public Works partners propose to do with the material that's scooped up?
Some of the material. So first of all, there are soil contamination issues that have been identified at the site. And so those have been basically outlined, and Public Works has an approved soil remediation plan to deal with the soil contamination. Basically, The other soil that's on site is not contaminated, so some of it could be trucked off and disposed of at a site that either needs fill or will accept that fill. Some of the material could be proposed to remain on site to create those basically basking habitat areas for the pond turtles. It could be bermed up. There's a variety of options for dealing with that soil. And so that'll really be a portion of the scope of work that the consultant will need to address is what do we do with this soil? Is it cost effective to excavate that much? What are the cost to benefit ratios of doing that excavation? So it's not a given that all of that soil will be excavated. That's really part of the design process.
Yeah, thank you, George. Are there any other questions or comments? Natasha?
Thank you. I have several. What kind of timeline are you looking at? Because this project's been on the books for over 10 years now.
Well, I can only speak really for the Creeks Division portion of the project. Obviously, Public Works is actively working towards final approvals for their restoration plan, but we're looking at getting a consultant hired by summer to develop the larger restoration project. It'd probably take about a year or so to do final design, and then during that time we would be doing concurrent permitting for that project. So if we're doing construction during the dry season, that would be 2017, May, June 2017.
And you said you're going to put in pools, so you're going to dig some of that channel out deeper than other areas. I assume you're going
Correct.
to have
and actually, the
ponds.
Existing topography, there is a pooled area in that first photo that I showed you at the eastern end of the channel. There's pooled water there, and so we would try to accentuate that and make deeper habitat, deeper water for the pond turtles.
Have you considered islands or logs for basking?
Yes.
Okay,
Yep.
good. That's a really quick way of doing it. And how deep will those pools be so they can retain water all summer?
At this point, we don't have that specific information, and so that'll be part of the design process, but I anticipate if we're trying to keep water there throughout the summer, we're looking at 3 to 4 feet or more. There is a trickle of water in, and there is groundwater that's relatively shallow.
So will you be dealing with the migration of the movement of the pond turtles from the main channel to the Elistero, or is that going to be a public works portion of the project?
Right now, that's undetermined. I believe that that's under their scope of work, and so we'll be evaluating what their proposal is and working with them on either refining that proposal or offering up an alternative.
Great, thank you.
Thanks.
Just to piggyback on that line of questioning, does Public Works know what the timeline is on their side of the project?
That's a different division.
Right.
This Public Works doesn't. Other one does.
I don't know what their specific timeline is. I know that they're in the middle of their permitting process. That can be a very long process. So I'm sorry, but I don't know. I can try to find out that information and get a timeline back to you.
George, I can say I know Chris Toth, the Water Resources.
They're taping the meeting. Don't forget to come to the mic. You don't want the phone to ring.
Indeed, I made sure I turned that thing off. Pat Kelly, Assistant Public Works Director, City Engineer. I can say that Chris Toth, our Water Resource Manager, Wastewater Manager, is very anxious to wrap this element up in collaboration with George, and because he's been that fund has had this obligation for many years and is very interested in finishing it.
So that's on the Elistero site, right? And then what about the
Yes.
the flood control pumping?
Regarding that, is that what's going to control that mostly will be construction funding. In order to get construction funding, we want to follow through with what Creeks had initiated and solve the flood control issues of the placement of the gates. In order to get there, we're going to have to do some upfront design using some city funds and then position ourselves for hopefully a final design and construction grant. We are currently working with the principal that George and Cameron had been working at with ESA and Bob Battaglio to develop a scope of work to try to answer those questions. And so we hope to be able to do that this summer and then get into a grant cycle, and then the grant cycle will determine the next steps.
Betsy, any questions? Okay. George, that was excellent. And Pat, thanks for coming down. And any last thoughts on the railroad station component? I know you gave a pretty detailed cross-section for the people at home.
No, other than, like I said before, the design that was outlined by the consultants at a conceptual stage is potentially feasible. It would require some additional analysis of the sandstone walls, but
I assume you're working with HLC and their staff because of the status of the
well, right now,
structures.
Creeks isn't proposing to move that concept forward any more than we already have. So the concept is outlined. We've done some technical analysis, shown that it is a legitimate design in terms of the technical feasibility. Right now, we want to focus on moving the El Estero project forward as quick as possible so it aligns with the wastewater restoration plan, as well as other capital projects such as Las Positas Channel and other projects that we're working on.
I did have one last question before I turn both of you loose. Another arm of the city, which is updating their local coastal plan, who are upstairs, have noted that state law now requires a section in the local coastal plan and in the general plan to deal with climate change and sea level rise. And obviously, those two things could conceivably be contributing factors to the location and long-range durability of the three components that you've outlined. Are you or our Public Works partners taking that into account as part of the design?
Absolutely. So the existing conditions report really outlined a lot of the proposed changes that are expected because of climate change, sea level rise, increased coastal erosion. And so in that existing conditions report, which is a several hundred-page document that contains over 10 various technical studies, those issues are addressed. Public Works has a copy of it. It is part of the design process, and a lot of our projects are funded in part by grants that are competitive grants, and for grants that are funding coastal projects, our primary criteria for the granting agency is, does it persist under the projected sea level rise scenarios that are adopted by the state? And if it doesn't, and the city can't show that it does, then it's basically not a competitive grant application. So yes, if we want to get grant money, we have to show that we're taking those issues into account.
Oh, well, thank you, Mr. Thompson. And it's clear you've obviously done a lot of research and had a lot of discussion with our Public Works partners and with other parts of the city. So really looking forward to the next phase of your work. And thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you.
That completes item 7A, which would bring us to item 7B, stormwater infiltration demonstration projects. And Mr. Tim Burgess, our water resources specialist. Tim?
Good evening. So I'm going to talk about, give an update on the stormwater infiltration demonstration projects. And first, I just want to start by doing a quick review of just undisturbed hydrology, basically how the rain falls and where it moves to. In an undisturbed, undeveloped area, rain will fall down, percolate through leaf area, through mulch underneath plants, soak into the soil where it's utilized by plants. It recharges groundwater, and it slowly filters to the creeks, allowing for sustained base flow in between storms and throughout our long dry season. When a natural area is paved, all of the pollutants that are associated with that pavement from the use of the pavement, like pets, automobiles, any kind of trash, any kind of other waste that happens, the rain pelts down on that pavement, loosens those things up, carries a concentrated mix of that to the storm drain, where it goes right to the creek. And those quick flows can degrade aquatic habitat, riparian habitat, and they don't really contribute much to groundwater. And so I'm going to talk about low-impact development, hydrology, and in particular permeable pavers. And the purpose of these is to mimic that natural hydrology. They allow for, and they first of all, they allow for the existing use, like a parking lot, a street, sidewalk, or an alley. But any rainwater that falls on that site might pick up some of those pollutants that are there, but it percolates through the gaps in the pavers, goes into a rock layer below, and into the subgrade soil below that, where microbes in the soil, plants surrounding there can process those pollutants, degrade them, uptake them, and then anything left follows its natural course in the groundwater, either deep groundwater or over to the creek. This is a cross section of the permeable paver design that we've implemented. On the top, you have there it is, permeable pavers along the top, and below that is a gravel layer, 3 different layers of rocks, and in between those rocks is not sand; it's just an open void space, and that allows for the storage of water. That allows for microbes to reside on that surface, and below that is the subgrade, kind of a native soil. Rainwater percolates through, is able to be stored in here because this is contained by edge restraints. So you basically have a basin. So you have really heavy rains. It gives it time to soak into that soil. In 2011, the Creeks Division completed the Mackenzie Park Stormwater Infiltration Project. This was a pilot project for permeable pavers, and it was done in a hybrid design in the parking lot there, where the parking stalls were replaced with a permeable paver system, and the driveways were kept as asphalt. And any rainwater that fell on the whole parking lot flows into these permeable paver systems. And in 2012, the Creeks Division applied for and received a grant from the Proposition 84 Stormwater Grant Program for $1.889 million. And that was for the construction of permeable paver systems at 5 different sites. It was completed in 2013 and consisted of over 100,000 square feet of asphalt replaced with permeable pavers and native vegetation. The project sites for that project were Stevens Park parking lot, and the entire parking lot was replaced from Cannon Drive all the way back, and the West Side Neighborhood Center off of Castillo between Victoria Street and Anapamu Street. A big portion of that parking lot was replaced with permeable pavers. The Oak Park Tennis Court lot, where a large portion was replaced with permeable pavers, and then some riparian habitat was sort of reclaimed. The Oak Park main lot really consists of 3 different sites: the picnic area, which you see here, the stage area, and then the main parking lot. All of that was replaced with permeable pavers, and then also a big portion of that was along the creek was restored with native vegetation. In order to understand the benefit of these to water quality and actually measure the benefit, staff went out and sampled runoff from storms off of these sites before the project was constructed to try to measure the pollutants coming off of that. And this was used to calculate loads that would be treated by the project once it was completed. And we tested for bacteria, total organic carbon, nutrients, hydrocarbons, suspended solids, metals, surfactants, and general toxicity to aquatic organisms. And these are some of the examples of the data that came from this. This is concentrations of the pollutants, and this is bacteria, E. coli, Enterococcus, total coliform. These on the left are the actual numbers of pollutants. So the higher the number, the more there is. These are each site, the different project sites, and you can see the bacteria numbers were high, and they often exceeded AB 411 standards. And contribute to beach warnings that we have at the beach and high levels in the creeks. Another one that we tested for was hydrocarbons. This was a test for. This is an example of a test for extractable fuel hydrocarbons. And you can see on the left is milligrams per liter, the concentration of samples that we got, and these are the sites. And it was done with 3 different storms, and so these are. This is a box plot where it shows each storm for each site, and this is the levels of it. So pretty high, when you talk about 3 milligrams per liter, that's getting up there, and up to 5 milligrams per liter, that's getting up there for hydrocarbons, considering the amount of rain that's coming off. And so methylene blue activated substances, that's a MBAS, it's a surfactant, it's kind of like soaps, it's toxic to aquatic organisms. And this is the general toxicity that was done, the tests that were done, and you can see this is a percent right here. It goes up to 120, but really 100% is really bad. And most of the sites were 100% toxic when you use that water running off these sites. And so we used these concentrations to find out the load of pollutants that were reduced. And this is an example of the calculation done for the 2013-2014 rain year. We got a little over 8 inches. So not that much, but on the far right, if you look over here, this was the total load reduction. Fecal indicator bacteria, this is actual number of bacteria that's it's really hard to visualize in the millions. Total organic carbon, this is a lot of leaf litter, things like that contribute to eutrophication in the creeks, algae, 33 kilograms. Kilograms, 2.2 pounds. You want to convert it in your head. These are the nutrients: nitrate, nitrogen, phosphorus. Over 8 pounds of some of these things. Hydrocarbons, 3.1 pounds. When you take that EFH, the extractable fuel, and you calculate for 100,000 square feet, you get 3.1 kilos, about 7 pounds of oil. It's maybe like a gallon. And then these are different metals, some naturally occurring, a lot of them not naturally occurring. And these numbers, this is just for our project sites. You could extrapolate this to the entire city of all the impervious surfaces that we have, and you're talking about really, really high numbers of pollutant loads that are going to the creeks that didn't really go there before we paved these areas. And so to confirm that we actually have captured this water and infiltrated it, we visually go out and check that the pavers aren't overflowing, but we also installed monitoring ports in these underneath the pavers, and so they go down to that subgrade soil at the bottom, and we put in a water level logger, and this measures the level of water beneath the pavers during a storm and after a storm. And so this is an example of a chart that's made from that, and so this red line is the rainfall accumulated over, this was about a 4-day period in last February, early March, where we got 5.5 inches of rain. We got a really good set of storms, and this was how the water accumulated. This is the inches of rain right here, and so you got to see over 5 inches. The blue line here is the actual water level inside that basin underneath the Oak Park stage, and so you see it reached up here, and this is the number corresponding to that level. And so here it got just under 2 inches high, here up to 3 inches high. To put that in perspective, the total depth of that basin is about 15 inches in these projects. So it really didn't come close to filling up and was allowed to infiltrate all that water, and you see it drops down as it infiltrates. This is another example at the West Side Neighborhood Center. Same storm. You see it gets up to a max of about 5.5 inches. A little higher at West Side Neighborhood Center because the runoff from the roof actually contributes more, so it fills up a little faster and a little more. This is the West Side Neighborhood Center for this last year. We've gotten 9 inches of rain so far. So this red line is the accumulation. This is starting in September. And you can see, the first storm, it popped up, got to 4 inches. We didn't have the logger into this storm. We got another storm here, got up to almost 7 inches. And so you basically see it, the rise and fall of that water as it fills up in the basin and then infiltrates into the soil. This is the Mackenzie Park parking lot, one of the wells there. And this one fills up the highest because we've got that hybrid design. Gets a lot of runoff from the paved asphalt areas around it. So you can see during a big storm, it reached 10 inches. Those are a little bit deeper to handle more rain to get that 1 inch in 24-hour storm event. That's required by our stormwater permit. 10 inches here, but those are more like 18 inches deep. So in 2014, Creeks Division applied for and received a grant from a Proposition 84 stormwater grant for $2.3 million, and that was for the construction of permeable pavers at the Plaza de Veracruz, Service Road, the sidewalks surrounding Alice Keck Park Memorial Gardens, and the street surface and sidewalks on the 700 and 800 block of Quarantina Street. So we did parking lots for the last round, and this round we're demonstrating putting permeable pavers in these other surfaces, sidewalks, alleys, and street surfaces. This is Plaza de Veracruz. This entire Park Service Road will be replaced with permeable pavers. This is the sidewalk surrounding Alice Keck Park. It's not only the sidewalk, but a lot of the of this right-of-way strip is paved as well. So all of that will be captured with stormwater with the permeable pavers. And the 700 and 800 blocks of Quarantina Street. This is the 700 block. This is the 700 blocks, and back there's the 800 blocks. We're doing the sidewalks and the street surface. 3 bids. So that's going to be done in 2 phases. Phase 1 will be done this summer, and we went out to bid for that project. 3 bids were received. Broff Construction submitted the lowest responsive bid, and yesterday City Council authorized the contract with Broff Construction for $1.159 million, and that includes a change order funding of $105,000. So, as I said, Phase 1, Plaza de Veracruz, will be done in this summer, starting in May, and then in July, after summer solstice parade, the Alice Keck Park Memorial Gardens, the sidewalks surrounding that site will begin construction, and those will take place this summer. Next summer, we will start in between the school years on the 700 and 800 blocks of North Quarantina Street and sidewalks, because that's right by the junior high. And that concludes the presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Burgess. Really, really comprehensive update. I was wondering earlier in your presentation when you were talking about the bacterial and chemical levels measured, are we still contracting with Trish Holden at UCSB, or are we doing that in-house now?
We do. We do. I think we're still working with Trish Holden and UCSB, but that's more for the human waste markers studies that we're doing, and we didn't do that here. What we did do is we just did we did regular bacteria results, and we have the El Estero wastewater lab does that. But for the other pollutants like metals and hydrocarbons and things, we contract that out to an outside lab to get those results.
Yeah. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I want to see if Penny had any questions.
I don't have any questions, but I just want to say we're really excited to see these projects, and it'd be great to, I know you guys do this already, but, any way we can help support the education and outreach so that it can inspire and get others in the community involved, especially in these dry years where what little runoff we do have, be great to get that infiltrating into the ground so it's not carrying that little bit of pollution, or a lot in some cases, into that tiny bit of water in our creeks where it can have an even greater impact. So
that's a good point. Thank you.
Yeah.
As part of the project, of all the projects, we have an extensive outreach component, and that's required by the grant as well. And so we do a lot of interpretive signage. We do city TV, mail postcards out, and this is a great way to get the word out. So there's a big outreach campaign with that, but I appreciate it.
Ms. Weber, do you have any questions?
have one. How do you choose these locations for the projects? I mean, is it a high concentration at those locations, or have you tested everything in this city to find out?
Right.
Best bang for your
Well, what we did was back when we were choosing. So all of these locations are public, first of all, and they are as part of our grant. In order to get this grant, a big component of this was the outreach, and a lot of these projects are in. For the 2014 project that we completed, all those are around parks, and so they get a lot of visitors per year. And so the outreach that we do there is tremendous, and we a lot of people get to see that, because a big part of this is a demonstration. We're not doing the whole city, but we're trying to show how this can be done. And so those being really visible spots was big. It's also within the department, and so we worked closely with the Parks Department on these, and then demonstrating parking lots. Parking lots make up a huge portion in the city of impervious surface, and so by demonstrating by showing how you can do a parking lot, we felt like that was really valuable. And then for this next project, demonstrating these other types of surfaces like streets, sidewalks, and an alley. That's another. If that, as part of this demonstration, if that were done all over, then we could really make an impact. And so that's how they were chosen. Cameron, do you have anything to add to that?
Thanks, Tim. I would just add a couple things. One is we find that as we're doing our monitoring and sampling, that the results from urban surfaces, parking lots and streets are pretty similar in terms of contamination and pollution loads in those areas. So that was trying to look for the place that's the most polluted parking lot or something is probably overkill, because they all have their problems associated with them. But we do have to look at things like soil types and slopes and things like that. So we've heard concerns from people about using this type of treatment system for runoff, using infiltration or using the pavers. And one of the common things we hear in the city is, I have clay soils and I'm not able to infiltrate water into the soil. So we looked around for a sampling of lots of different soil types to sort of demonstrate this or test this out with different clay content and different infiltration rates in the soil. And what we found is even on a relatively small site, when we go and we do infiltration tests, percolation tests, we see highly variable infiltration rates. So even with high clay content, you still get really good infiltration rates. And this is an example of that right here. We also have other kind of obstacles put out there saying, oh, well, my parking lot's not flat. I've got a slope on the parking lot. So we looked for a location that we could build one of these where we had a slope. So at Stevens Park, for example, the entrance into Stevens Park is a pretty significant slope going in there, and we designed the project to be able to infiltrate water on that slope. And then we had concerns about infiltrating water near a building, so we looked for a location where we could put one of these near a building. We had engineers look at that to make sure it was going to be safe, the building would be structurally sound, and so we ended up with a project over at the West Side Neighborhood Center. So we're looking for different applications for different types of impervious areas with different types of soils, different types of pollutants, and different types of surrounding conditions and land uses.
A little bit more complex than what I anticipated. Has nothing to do with the proximity to creeks or anything. So that's good, interesting.
Well,
so
all the runoff ends up
Yeah.
going into the storm drain and into the creek. So no matter how close or far away you are, it all ends up there.
So is this kind of somehow be translated to, let's say, City Council when they're looking at future projects? So they have this information. So when they are determining if a project is going to be approved or not, they can incorporate these as conditions? Is that?
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Hopefully, they are aware of this project and of these projects. And we did we did a presentation to the Planning Commission for that specific purpose because they review a lot of projects and talked about these projects and how they're designed and gave some specifics on that, and they were really receptive to it, and
Great.
they had a lot of good feedback.
Wonderful, thank you.
Any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Moldaver. Tim, thank you for the presentation. It was very informative. To start, I'd like, if you can, go into how do these projects compare in terms of cost to conventional asphalt and concrete?
It's a good question. Okay, so what we did a cost analysis. I don't actually have that chart with me, but of these paver projects compared to asphalt. And so what you have when you put in asphalt, you have a relatively lower upfront cost on an asphalt surface. And so asphalt, I believe, costs about $9, $10 a square foot. But what you have with asphalt is every 6 years or so, that asphalt needs to be reslurried. And then after about 20, 25 years, it needs to be grinded down, and then overlaid again with asphalt. And so over a 50-year period, you end up having a high cost for asphalt. And so with permeable pavers, the initial cost is with our projects. With these projects, and this actually includes design as well. It's $16 to $17 a square foot, and it varies for different sites. But overall, for that last project, that's what it was. And we've from Mackenzie Park, we gained a lot of experience on kind of how to do these and really cut costs and do them efficiently. And so what you have with permeable pavers, you put the pavers in. And their lifespan is that of concrete. I mean, they're really strong. They're made of concrete, and that's 70, 80 years is what they say, and it's quite possibly more. And the thing about concrete is its lifespan is 70 or 80 years. It starts to crack. Permeable pavers, they already have the fissures in them, and if you have any cracking of the pavers, they can be replaced. And so you have that initial upfront cost. But over the lifespan of the project, it ends up being about the same as asphalt. However, when you put down an asphalt surface, you also have to satisfy our stormwater permit. You have to actually treat that water, and so you have an additional cost of treating that water somewhere else off-site with asphalt, and with the pavers, that's already included in the package. And so we really see it as, over the long run, we see it as a bargain. It's actually cheaper for the permeable pavers.
Thank you. That was a great explanation. And then,
Mr. Hawkins, if I could just add one more thing. One of the, and this also goes to Ms. Lomas's question. One of the other considerations we're looking at is street trees and the effects of having asphalt and or concrete around the street trees. So a couple things with that. One is we are just going through this next project we're doing on the sidewalks. We're gonna be able to price out how much our per square foot cost is for permeable pavers on sidewalks, which we think will be considerably less because we don't need to have the depth of aggregate material underneath the pavers, so we don't have as much excavation and we don't have as much rock material to buy because we don't have the heavy loads of dump trucks and fire trucks and things on them. So it's much more simple. We think the cost will be less. But getting back to the streets and sidewalks, one of the reasons we picked this street is it has some mature Italian stone pines on one block of Quarantina. Those are about 80-year-old trees there, and when you drive down that street, you're bouncing all over the place. There's a lot of uplifting of the asphalt. The sidewalks are cracked and uplifted on both sides of the street. And our hope is when we put the permeable pavers in that we will, we have the aggregate layer underneath, and we'll not only let water run through the pavers and down to the tree roots when it's raining, but also just urban runoff during the summertime. So you have irrigation overspray up the street coming down the gutter, and instead of running down and dropping in the storm drain, it'll drop right down and provide water for those trees. And our hope is that by having that soil moisture down much deeper than right under the surface of the asphalt, the roots will be drawn in that direction and will not be harmed by the vehicles driving right over the surface, and also not cause that uplifting. So our hope is to not only cut down on the maintenance of the asphalt, of going out and doing the slurry sealing and then the repaving, but to cut down on the maintenance of tree root pruning and resurfacing because of root damage to those surfaces.
Any other questions, Mr. Hawkins?
Yeah, just have a few more. So these are demonstration projects, and my understanding based on past discussions is that Creeks does not want to be in the pavers business in perpetuity. What are the primary challenges and obstacles, and I think we touched on a few of them today, but what are the primary challenges and obstacles with expanding these projects across the city in a bigger way than just example demonstration projects?
I think initially the primary obstacle is cost. Where we are seeing these go in are right now we're starting to see more and more of them go in on large private projects and small private projects where somebody was going to use concrete because the cost is comparable to putting in a concrete patio or something, except you don't have, Mr. Burgess mentioned the stormwater permit. The city has a stormwater discharge permit under the Clean Water Act with the state, so we have to treat discharges before they go into the storm drain system. So individual property owners are using these materials because it's a way for them to meet the treatment requirements. And if they were going to put concrete in, there's no difference in cost. So we're also seeing them. I know the city's downtown parking division has paseos and other areas in between some of the downtown parking lots that are concrete, and they're looking at putting permeable pavers in there. So where the biggest challenges tend to come are with asphalt areas in the streets. And so I think what we'll see is over time, as the city starts to experience more of the benefit of not having to go and maintain these areas anymore for long periods of time, you'll see more of that benefit. But it's hard in the short term to make a decision to spend more money for something that's going to last a long time than to get more things fixed for a shorter period of time.
If I could add to that, probably the staff doesn't want to, there's been extensive conversations within the city for several years now about a revenue deficit to maintain and improve infrastructure throughout the city, not just permeable pavers as demonstration projects, but existing streets, existing buildings, the urban forest, just a huge number, the police station. And the city's been holding public workshops and community outreach through the administrator's office. And I think that the expectation is that they will ask the community, give them a range of options in an upcoming election to gauge the mood of the community about how much they want to invest in maintaining and improving and expanding infrastructure into the future. And if the response is positive, I think that will, over the next 20, 25 years, be the resource for streets and sidewalks and paseos to get the permeable paver thing out into the streets division, where when they're going to design review panels, the Planning Commission, the ABR or whatever, that will be a regular part of the conversation. And there will be a little bit more money available so that if it seems appropriate, they'll be able to do it. So I think it's not just the upfront cost of permeable pavers. The city has that one item in a suite of, like 20 or 30 other different areas of streets and sidewalks and buildings and parks and infrastructure throughout the entire city. And I think the mayor and the council are going to be asking for some direct resident input within the next year or two on that.
Thanks, Lee. And then the last thing I wanted to add is we have been working with the Public Works Department, not only doing the design for these permeable paver streets and sidewalks, but I think that what we're working with them on it towards is having a standard design detail for sidewalks as the city goes forward, and as the conditions in certain areas are appropriate, they would make it a standard to use permeable pavers on the sidewalk. And I think the project we're constructing this summer and the experience we have with that will determine whether that becomes kind of the norm going forward.
Mr. Hawkins, one more question.
It's a clarification. This item on the agenda is listed for action, and although on the staff report, I believe it was for discussion. I just wanted to get a clarification on that from staff, because I would like to make a motion, actually, if it is for action.
It's agendized for action. I don't think that was our intent, but it is. So if the committee wants to make a motion and take some sort of action, then I think it's free to do so.
Okay, before you offer your motion, let me see if anyone else on the committee has any further questions for Mr. Burgess, so he can sit down if he wants to. Seeing no other questions, Mr. Hawkins, did you have a trial motion for action?
I would definitely characterize it as a trial motion. Let's try this. As the city moves to enhance road and sidewalk funding, as Mr. Moldaver pointed out, the Creeks Committee recommends that permeable pavers be prioritized as the key strategy to reduce runoff, enhance city infrastructure at an equivalent cost to conventional concrete and asphalt, enhance flood control, reduce urban heat island effect, recharge groundwater, and all the other benefits that I'm not listing here. And I'll leave it at that for now as the trial.
For the sake of discussion, is there a second to Mr. Hawkins' motion?
I'll second that.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Lomas. Are there any questions, comments, or suggestions for the maker of the motion? I've got a couple of questions. Number one, these are demonstration projects. What if the drought proves to be only 3 to 5 years rather than 50 to 100 years, and we start getting significant rainfall again? Suppose in some areas the demonstration is less successful than in others. You've indicated in your wording that it would be the key strategy, whereas it might simply be an important tool to be considered. And I also wanted to ask you, is this, if this passes, would you be asking us to advise the Parks and Recreation Commission, the Planning Commission, or the City Council? And I ask that because since there's an important meeting at City Hall today about doing election districts, our City Council liaison, Councilman Greg Hart, is unable to be with us today. And similarly, there was a Planning Commission workshop earlier today on the zoning code. So our commission liaison has not been able to be with us today either. So to whom, if this passes, would we be making this recommendation?
I would recommend that it go to City Council and the Planning Commission. And I think that's a good point about the wording, Lee. I think my intention was, I see permeable pavers as the key strategy for reducing runoff, and it also has all of the ancillary benefits that I talked about. So I'd be happy to entertain a motion or amendment for that.
No, we have a motion and a second. I just wanted to clarify what the motion is. And I want to see if there are any other questions. Is there any staff input? Or, okay, then I was going to ask the maker of the motion for the benefit of our staff, if you could read the motion again very slowly so that both the video and the staff are able to capture the main thrust of it accurately.
Do you guys need to take notes on my facial expressions too? All right, let's try this. As the city moves to enhance funding for road and sidewalks, the Creeks Committee recommends that permeable pavers be prioritized as the key strategy to reduce runoff, enhance city infrastructure at equivalent cost. Sorry, thank you. At enhance city infrastructure at equivalent cost to conventional concrete and asphalt, enhance flood control, reduce urban heat island effect, recharge groundwater, and I think that's it.
Okay, and you'll share the written text of your motion with staff at the end of the meeting just to make sure that we get it right.
Actually, what we've done in the past with that is to write that down, send it to the chair and vice chair of the committee to confirm that it was what they remember from the meeting, and before we send it out.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Benson. So there's a motion and a second on the floor. Any last questions or comments? All right, hearing none, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. 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 Are there any opposed? Are there any abstentions? All right, please let the record show that Mr. Hawkins' motion is passed unanimously on this March 18th of 2015. And thank you again, Mr. Burgess. And is there anything else on 7B you want to share with us?
No, thank you.
Okay, really appreciate your update. Mr. Benson, as we move towards item number 8, is there anything you want to tell the committee or the public about the time and place of the next scheduled meeting?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Actually, there is. Our next regularly scheduled meeting was scheduled for April 15th, which is Wednesday evening. We are going to be canceling that meeting and then rescheduling for the following week, April 22nd, because we will be presenting the budget for the Creeks Division at that meeting, and we, as a matter of custom, wait until the city budget is presented to the City Council before we present it to any of the advisory committees or commissions. So I'll actually be presenting at the Parks and Recreation Commission that afternoon and then zipping over here to present our budget to you guys same day. And that's at 5:30.
Okay. Is there a motion to adjourn reinforced by that information?
I motion to adjourn.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right. Thank you. It's been moved and seconded that we adjourn the meeting at 6:45 p.m. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? Are there any abstentions? Thank you. The meeting is adjourned. Great meeting.
And let him go, hey sister, I'm gonna wash that man right out of my hair.